to understand Iran in its contemporary characteristic, it is important to also give a historical context. Of course, we now know that there is dissatisfaction with the Ayatollahs and their theocracy. But it is important to remember that the history of Iran as we know it today must be traced to as early as 1925 with the Pahlavi regime. And if one does not drown in history, after the establishment of the Pahlavi regime, we then had the famous or infamous coup in 1953, which removed the Pahlavis before they restored themselves. And after that, the agitation by the Ayatollahs led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And that is how in 1979, the Americans now come into the fore a lot more visibly during the administration of Jimmy Carter. And you remember it is during that period that there was a siege of the American embassy for 444 days. And 52 American diplomats were held blindfolded and, of course, humiliated. And I think the United States of America has never forgotten that humiliation. And in as much as the Ayatollahs then came into office with the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini becoming the spiritual leader, and we had different presidents, Rafsanjani, Rouhani, and then late Ahmadinejad. And what one saw was the demand by the Ayatollahs that there is only one way of running Iran, through a theocracy. And then the accusation that they were trying to be a nuclear power, and their closeness initially to the Soviet Union and to Russia. So there has been a combination of issues. And that, of course, very quickly led to a number of issues leading up to the Iraq-Iran war between 1980 and 1988. And after that, the economies started suffering, despite the reforms that were instituted, particularly during the populist administration of Ahmadinejad. Attempts to use oil to improve the quality of people's lives. And after that, of course, during the Rouhani administration, when the nuclear deal was entered into between the Europeans and the Americas, and things never quite normalized. And the repression of the people. You have a society which is aware of what is happening in the world, the freedom that are enjoyed by everybody or most people in different parts of the world, and a theocracy which wants to dictate what you wear, the place of women in society. And that is how in the year 2022, when the young lady Mahsa Amini dies in prison, that was when we saw people coming out into the streets of Tehran and other places. And there is a sense in which this is a continuation of what started in the year 2022. The people had conquered fear. But right now, the situation is exacerbated because of the sanctions. The Iranians cannot sell their oil freely. The Iranians cannot access the markets freely. They cannot borrow. And their currency has been devalued in a manner that has never been seen in many parts of the world. And that has made the people begin to rise up. And they are rising up on a number of issues. They are saying we want greater freedoms. They are saying the economy is so bad that we want to see improvement. But the reality is that the economy cannot improve. And one can see that in the very reconciliatory messages from both the spiritual leader or the Ali Khamenei and President Masoud. The demonstrations have been going on for almost 3 weeks, but they are not coming out with violent language, if you may. And one of the things that they are now doing is to externalize the problem. They are saying, we know we have domestic problems, but we can see the hand of the United States of America. We can see the hand of Israel. And as regards Israel, you remember in the month of June, the year 2025, there was the 12-day war. And that war, in my view, has never been concluded. There was a very loose agreement which was midwifed by the United States of America, and there is an armistice of sorts. But technically, Iran and Israel are at war, which then begs the question, what is happening now? What is happening now from where I sit is that you have an administration which is a theocracy, an administration that is going through a constitutional crisis. There is a younger population of Iranians who think that their country should be administered differently. There are economic problems, the remnants of the Pahlavi regime. And we are being told that one of the sons of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is actually one of the prime movers of the demonstrations that are taking place in Iran now. Whether true or not, we do not know. We are being told that the Israelis are also somehow exercising some control via an invisible hand. We are told that the Americans are also present, and in the case of the Americans, they cannot escape indictment because their President Trump is saying, you touch any of the demonstrators and we are locked and ready to bomb you. So that is the situation in which Iran finds herself. And as we speak now, they are on high military alert because they are thinking that in the same way that it happened in Venezuela, the Americans may very well parachute in, seize Masoud, the president, seize Khamenei, the supreme leader, and seize other people. And we must remember during the 12-day war, the Israelis were able to eliminate senior scientists, so that there is a possibility that this can happen. I know many commentators take the view that what happened in Caracas cannot happen in Tehran. But even if it is not an exact replica of what happened in Caracas, the Americans are capable of entering into that space and creating a vacuum, therefore. And if a vacuum is created, then what will ensue is chaos, and we don't have to look far. When Saddam Hussein was eliminated in Iraq, you've never seen Iraq go back to factory setting, if one may use that metaphor. So Iran finds herself in a very difficult situation because of a combination of legitimate domestic problems, a constitutional crisis, and external problems, which all conjoined only spell one word: danger. You know, whenever you see a country going through a crisis of the kind that we see in Iran, it means that institutions are no longer responding to the needs of the people. The reasons may be many, but let us trace history a little. During the days of the Pahlavi regime, in the 1979 revolution that was led by Ayatollah Khomeini, the argument was that the Pahlavi administration had become oppressive, they had become corrupt, they were no longer serving the interest of the people, and that therefore what Iran needed was a new constitutional dispensation that gave pride of place to Islam as articulated by the Ayatollahs, which is the Shia version of Islam. They also promised that they would undertake economic reforms, and some of these reforms were in fact evident in the early days of President Rafsanjani and Rouhani. that they were also going to ensure that whenever it was necessary, they would enter into arrangements that would ensure peace. So they made sense during that period that there was need to remove the Pahlavis. And even during the 444-day siege, one of the demands for Americans was, return to us these corrupt individuals that we may punish them. Then came the 1980 Iran-Iraq war, which devastated the economy. And after that war, and in 1989, following the death of Khomeini and the rise of Khamenei, the whole idea of the economy being improved, oil subsidies, fuel subsidies, to ease the burden of the people, legitimized the regime. But then the economy started going down, and the people started asking, but the economy is not improving. The quality of our lives are not improving. Our currency is becoming useless. Our investments are becoming useless. The Ayatollahs are oppressing us even more. Come the year 2022, the young girl is arrested for not dressing according to the code prescribed by the regime. She unfortunately dies in prison. And the women are now saying, we want to be treated like human beings. So as it is now, there is appetite for change. For some people, there's even nostalgia for the old regime, which is very human. And all these factors then legitimize and justify the kind of calls that we see from the United States of America, that this is a tired administration. And of course, the word that the United States of America and Western Europe always use is democracy, a one-size-fits-all Eurocentric, Americocentric model of governance. And the younger generation are responding to this rhetoric. And I hear some of them saying, what we want is change. We'll deal with what change brings later. A dangerous thing to say, because history is consistent in telling us that when you make change and that change is not orderly, restoring order can take time. But that is an intellectual debate which does not respond with real politique. Real politique is that the Americans would want to see a totally different administration in Tehran. The Israelis would want to see a totally different administration in Tehran, and for specific reason. During the 12-day war, for the first time in an impactful way, a missile landed in Tel Aviv from Tehran. Missiles supposedly supplied from Tehran emanated from Yemen. So in the context of geopolitics, Israel sees Iran as the only viable threat, which is so close to nuclear capability, and that if you neutralize this regime, then you kill that possibility. And remember that the Americans also bombed some of the facilities, and they think that this is an unfinished business. So when they talk about regime change, they also want to finish the unfinished business. And from where I sit, that unfinished business started in 1979 with the humiliation of the United States of America, and it must be concluded. Iran, the Ayatollahs must be humiliated. American administration, the presidents notwithstanding, has a long memory. And they remember 1979. You know, there is the assumption, particularly from Washington, that if you remove the Ayatollahs, then you will simply impose a regime that will pander to the whims and diktats of the United States of America. But I think that is not going to be that easy. The Ayatollahs also have a very critical support base. And the Iranians are also a proud people. and they are not going to allow themselves without putting up a fight if the Americans think that they can control their affairs politically and economically. And I think that any attempt at regime change will only create the chaos that we see in that region. So you will have an unstable Iran, an unstable Iraq, an unstable Syria, and of course, relatively unstable Lebanon. Perhaps there are those within the United States of America that love it that way, because instability is also a multi-million-dollar industry. I think the Israelis would love an unstable Iran in the same way that you have an unstable Syria, an unstable Lebanon, an unstable Iraq, which you can bomb at whim without consequence. So allowing our imaginations to be fertile, it is possible that there are those who literally don't care. Their rhetoric may say, we care for the people of Iran, but they don't care for the people of Iran. They love an unstable Iran, which is then susceptible to manipulation and which can be bombed at any time without any serious response. Sometimes there is no logic in realpolitik.
You know, when one looks at Iran and the rhetoric of Iran, you know, Iran is one of the few countries which believes that the Israeli, what they call the Zionist regime, must be swept off the surface of this earth. There is not a single country that uses that kind of rhetoric as regards the state of Israel. But one can never say never. In the history of the world, the worst of enemies have sometimes become allies for the sake of either a short-term agenda or a long-term agenda. And who knows that even as between Iran and Israel, there may come into place administrators or administration that see the bigger picture and recognize that for the sake of peace and relative stability, they ought to have a détente or a rapprochement, and that is what will serve the both of them, because there is also wariness of war. The Israelis are wary of war. The Iranians also want an economy that is vibrant and thriving. And that can only be achieved in the absence of conflict. So one can foresee a situation where in future there may be some kind of very structured relationship between Iran and Israel and the United States of America. And it is in this context that I understand the willingness of the Iranians on different occasions to enter into an arrangement as regards their nuclear capability, and to convince both the West and the West, to include the United States of America, that our enrichment of uranium is not for military purposes, but for civilian purposes. All these tells you that the appetite for peace is there, and it must be there. When you fought a war into a stalemate with the Iraqis 1980 to 1988, the impact is still there. When you are being bombed, when you are sanctioned, when your money is almost worthless in real terms, and you know that the source is that there is a conspiracy against you which is being choreographed from the United States of America and Europe, and that you have a neighbor in Israel, not a neighbor in the physical geographical sense, but a neighbor in the sense of being in the same geopolitical region, which is ready to be used as a hammer to strike you as a nail, then you can have appetite for some kind of peace, however described. You know, Yemen, the regime change in Iran is going to be impactful in the region. I think as regards Yemen and the Houthis, particularly in Yemen, their big underwriters have been the Iranians.
As we know now, the Saudis are beginning to gain ground in that part of the world. And I think if the regime changes in Iran, then the supply of weapons will be cut, and the Houthis will not have the capacity or the ability to deal with the Saudis or any other perceived enemies in the manner that they have been. And they will have no bullets in quantities that they need. They'll not have the missiles in the quantity that they need. And they would very easily be subdued by the combined force of the Saudis and the Israelis. So it would change that situation very dramatically. Indeed, even as I speak, the situation in Yemen is changing. The ease with which the Saudis have been gaining territory and the ease with which you can see things happening in the favor of the Saudis is indicative of the fact that something is not happening and that supplies from Iran are not happening as they used to the Houthis in Yemen. So the regime change, if it happens in Iran, is going to have major geopolitical realities in that arena. You know, when I think about the President of the United States of America, President John Donald Trump, and what he says after every event, he said when they bombed Iran, when they tried to take out their nuclear facility, he said, we did it so efficiently, so effectively, in the only way that the United States of America can do it. No other nation on earth can do it like we do it. And when they did it in Caracas, he used the same rhetoric. And I'm quite certain if there was a regime change, he'll say, we told you, it is only the United States of America that is capable of doing this. And it's only possible when I, Donald Trump, is the President of the United States of America. The only word that he has yet to use is to say that he is the greatest president that the United States of America has and will ever see. And it is interesting that as he wages these little wars, he still thinks that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, even as he wages war. So I imagine that that is going to happen, if, or rather, will or could happen if there is a regime change. He'll, of course, engage in rhetorical chest thumping that the United States of America is indeed the greatest nation on earth, which is in keeping with the rhetoric that his agenda is to make America great again. This America that was humiliated under Carter, this America that was humiliated under the Democrats' administration has now been restored to the highest pedestal, and it is doing what it should, police the world. And that is demonstrated by his own statement that the only thing that restricts him, and therefore by extension the United States of America, is his own morality. In the recent past, no leader has ever said that the only restraining thing is his own morality as judged by himself. In all these things, Israel stands in a very unique position, unique in the sense that since the creation of the United Nations in 1945 and the coming into force of international instruments such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions of 1949, the institutions such as the ICC, the institutions such as the ICJ, Israel is the only country on earth that now operates outside of what is known as international law. They are not subject to it, not because they are exempted, but they simply believe that the state of Israel is unique and cannot be subject. So when all these happens, I think the Prime Minister of Israel and those who are in support of extremism in Israel will come and say, we told you, we are the chosen people. Whatever we do is what the law is. We can ignore anybody on earth. We can do what we want, and nobody can do anything about it. And that arrogance is self-evident on a daily basis from the rhetoric of the leaders of Israel in both their guarded and unguarded moments. And they will be able to say, who can tangle with us in the entire region? We have subdued the Arabs, the Iranians who thought that they were different. We have also subdued them. Israel is Israel. Israel is chosen. That is what they will say. And international law doesn't apply to us. In fact, no law applies to us. We are the law. It reminds me of what the King Henry VIII of France once said, that he is the state. I hear Netanyahu saying, I am the world. I am the world. It's painful. You know, as we speak now, and there are too many things on the table, too many moving parts in the ongoing justing or this diplomatic thing between the United States and Iran. If indeed it happens, and it can, that the United States of America and Iran enter into an arrangement that then stabilizes their relationship, the Middle East will change. Because if you look at the Middle East now, nobody simply wants to speak against Israel. Look at all of them, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Lebanese, the Jordanians. Nobody wants to speak against Israel. The only country that really raised its head and said, we cannot allow this to happen and we are going to do something about it, is Iran. So you take Iran out of the equation, then Israel rules the roost and does so in the manner that it prescribes and implements, and nobody can do anything about it. Look at Syria now. The leader is now doing what America wants him to do. And when the Israelis want to bomb, when the Americans want to bomb, they do it at will. Right now, as we speak in the Middle East, the Beirut government is already saying that we are moving south to disarm Hezbollah. And of course, the Jordanians have nothing to say. So eliminate Iran from the equation. Israel is the dominant power, doing what they want without consequence. You know, when you look at the dynamics in the region, the metaphor, or is it the idiom, have your cake and eat it, occupies a very interesting position. The United States of America and Israel have always taken the position that they can literally have their cake and that they can eat it. In the short to medium term, they may think that that is true. But in the long term, it is what creates resistance. It is what creates organizations and energizes organizations such as ISIS. So that you may think that you are safe as a nation, but your people are not safe. That is why even long after stability appears to have come, you find people are being killed by way of mass shootings, by way of individuals being threatened. So if you look at nations as composed of people rather than amorphous organizations and institutions, then you can only have your cake and eat it to a certain extent. But you expose your citizens to danger wherever they are. They must always look behind to see who is hunting them down, because they are citizens of a particular nation. And I hope that that message is understood by those who run nations which think that they can run roughshod over all nations on earth. Ultimately, there is a payback time. And as somebody once said, I think